In a world where trust is shattered and love is tested, one channel dares to uncover the untold stories of heartbreak and betrayal. Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles, where real-life tales of infidelity are unraveled, secrets exposed, and lives forever changed. Join us as we navigate the complex world of relationships, offering support, understanding, and a place for those who have faced the pain of betrayal. Subscribe to Heartbreak Chronicles now, because every story deserves to be told, and every heartbreak deserves to be heard. Story 1. My second-born son is a constant reminder of my wife's affair, and I am growing to resent him for it. Where do I go from here? Throwaway for obvious reasons. I'll give you full context before I get into my current situation. I am 44 meters, married to 43F. We were high school sweethearts who stayed together during university and married young. From the beginning I have known my wife as my soulmate, and I have never desired any woman other than her. Our oldest son is 16. After he was born, my wife and I had some marital trouble. Our schedules were off and we struggled with finding time to be intimate and to actually act like husband and wife. During this period I discovered that she had an ongoing affair with a senior work colleague. We separated briefly, but reconciled. Shortly after we reconciled, she told me that she was pregnant. I should note at this point that she at first didn't believe she was pregnant, as she had gotten her period during the first 12 weeks of her pregnancy. Our second baby arrived, and as he began to grow I became suspicious of how different he looked to both me and my other son. My wife agreed to a paternity test and, as I thought, the baby was not mine. I was broken, but decided that as I deeply loved both my wife and my two sons, I would do my best to get past this revelation, and I sincerely believed for a while that I had. We had a third son a couple of years later and have since lived a happy life together. My wife seemed sincerely sorry for her affair, committed to therapy, and since then I have had absolutely no reason to doubt her fidelity. Her colleague moved away shortly after their affair ended, and they have not been in contact since. However, over the years the situation has started to eat away at me for a number of reasons, and I'm not sure how much longer I can continue. It is incredibly clear that the second child is not mine. He looks nothing like me or his brothers. It has never come up in conversation, but I do worry that I am a laughingstock in our community. I am a short and slim man. My wife's affair partner was very tall and athletic, and the boy has his genes. At age 13 he is already almost as tall as I am. It is very clear that in a couple of years he will tower over me. Part of me believes that the boy is aware of this, deep down. He is disobedient and disrespectful at times, far more so than his brothers are. We had a heated row recently that resulted in him trying to get physical with me before I'd escalated the situation. This is no worry to me currently, but as he grows could cause problems. He is already taller and stronger than my oldest son. They generally got on quite well growing up, but since starting high school he has started to occasionally bully my oldest son, who is an introverted and shy boy. This may be the most unhinged one, so apologies in advance. The boy is good at everything. He is already among the quickest and strongest in his class. He plays for a few sports teams where he excels. He is a talented musician and regularly appears on gifted and talented lists at school. I am regularly told that I should be very proud of my son, and the itch is becoming unbearable. What do I do from here? Where do I go? I honestly feel like these aren't the thoughts of a sane man, but at the same time they make sense. I feel tortured on a day-to-day basis by a constant reminder that my wife sought out an affair with a man who is physically superior and more successful than I am. A man who cast her aside and moved on, and now the likelihood is that I am raising his son as my own. I feel like I am losing my mind. What can I do from here? TLDR, my wife cheated on me and my second-born son is not mine. I have known this for a long time, but the fact is starting to eat away at my sanity. Story 2. My GF of 12 years has a crush on her coworker. I have been dating my girlfriend Anna since middle school. We're both each other's first BTW. We recently graduated from university, both with good career paths, and have been living together for 3 years. Anna started working in July of this year and had a fairly rough start. She became friends with this older guy called William who's been working there for 10 years, and they kinda just hit it off as coworkers. They started texting each other a bit outside of work around September because he was having marriage problems and wanted someone to talk to. I really didn't mind it at first and thought it was nice of Anna to be supportive. But today, while trying to update a game on Anna's computer so we could play together, Messenger opened with the startup and I couldn't help myself to snoop a little. Apparently, for the past few weeks, she's been flirting with him, fairly explicitly. William even sent her a picture of his nude torso to show off his abs, and Anna answering that she would jump on him next time they saw each other at work. The vibe I got was that it's just banter, but with some inappropriate connotations. When she got home from work today, I confronted her about it. She admitted that she has a crush on her coworker, but she never did anything physical. She never intended to and thought the flirting would just fizzle out after a bit. She told me that she's really sorry for what she did and that it was completely selfish of her to only think about herself during these events. I felt deeply hurt by all of this and packed my things. She tried really hard to stop me from leaving, but I just couldn't stay. I just can't believe she would disrespect the 12 years we've committed to each other for some flirting with a married man who has a wife and kid. It got really late and I had nowhere to go, so I booked a room in a hotel near work. I couldn't bring myself to go back home to my parents because I know they'd never let me see her again if I told them what happened. A part of me really wants to give her a second chance and meet with her tomorrow, but I don't know if I'll be going back to a relationship that's already been soured. I don't know what I should do. Should I go back to my parents? Should I give Anna a second chance? Am I overreacting? Help. TLDR, GF of 12 years has a crush on her coworker and has been exchanging flirty texts. I packed my bags and left and don't know what to do anymore. Am I overreacting? Update. First of all, I want to thank everyone so much from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to respond to my original post and giving me advice. I honestly don't think I would have survived the weekend without you guys. I think I owe everyone who took their time with me an update, and here's what happened since. I don't think this is the choice many of you might think I should be making, and I don't know myself if I'm making a huge mistake, but this is what I've come to terms with. I'm going to give Anna a chance to make things better, and we're going to try rebuilding things from scratch. I want to take some time together and get to know each other as if I'm getting to know this new person for the first time, because she is clearly not the person I thought she was. If it works out over the next few months, then her. If not, then I'm fully ready to end things on good terms. After I left home on Thursday night, I stayed close to work over the weekend because I was working Saturday. I decided not to go home to my parents because I don't think I would have been in a good environment to think about everything objectively and reflect on myself. I did spend some time with a few close friends and they have been nothing but supportive. I owe them big time, and I'll have to take time to thank them properly when things get better. During the weekend, Anna did try to reach out to me, but I decided not to answer back and really take some time before I said anything. On the first day after I left, I was mostly consumed by anger and frustration. I hated myself, I hated Anna, I hated the guy. I didn't know how I could possibly move past this. I started having panic attacks. On the second day, the anger kinda melted away and I was mostly just sad. I was disappointed that things turned out how they were, and I really experienced with every fiber of my being just how hurt I am. On the third day, surprisingly, I felt calm and somewhat came to terms with how things were. I tried to look at things as coldly, as objectively, and as honestly as I could. To my surprise, I did not feel for a second any relief for being away from the relationship, and I was actually thinking really hard about what could be done to make things work. I felt like I was in problem-solving mode rather than a vindictive mode, which helped me realize I still care about her. I tried to make it as clear to myself as I could about how understanding I am willing to be with Anna and what I need for myself to be comfortable again in this relationship. I made lists, I talked to a few Redditors who shared similar experiences, and scrutinized myself with the pros and cons. I think that I might be sadder not being in this relationship than being in it while trying to cope with all of this, if that makes sense. Finally decided to go see her, talk to her, and see where it goes. I wanted to go into the meeting with no intention of getting back together, just to give Anna a chance to make things clear on what she thinks, what she wants, and what she's willing to do. Honestly, she pretty much said all the right things. During the time we were apart, she already quit her job and cut contact with William. She deleted her conversation with him and plans on blocking him once she can be sure she won't be contacted anymore for work-related things. For the remaining time she will be working, she will only be sharing about 3 hours a week of shift overlap with the guy. She made me believe that she was remorseful and very self-critical about what happened. I also brought up wanting her to come clean to the wife. She was reluctant a bit at first but did not push back when I told her that I would think better of her if she did. She currently has no means of contacting the wife, but she told me that she will do everything she can to get it done. We talked for hours, went to grab some food, and we talked some more. Maybe I'm just really good at gaslighting myself, but I've become more and more understanding of what put her in the situation. By no means am I justifying that what she said and did was all right. Heck, this is still the most painful thing I've ever experienced in my life, and I don't know if I'll ever forgive her for this, but everything that led up to it made sense to me. Hear me out if this makes sense to you too. First, we are the only romantic love interest we've ever known growing up, and she has been more than good in this relationship up until this point. It is only normal for her to be a little curious, right? I know I've thought about things too. Second, her entire university, college experience was squandered by COVID and never made any friends in her field. She never went out to parties, she never hung out with classmates, and she never even went to school for 3/4 years of her program. She was never a very social person, but she never had the chance to mature and discover herself socially. I was lucky enough to be in a program that was small and had to be present through COVID. I can tell just how much I've gained from my time at university. Lastly, I have to admit I wasn't perfect in the past few months. When she started working, she was under a lot of stress, and to a certain extent, I wasn't as understanding and supportive as I should have been. I wasn't attentive to her needs, and on a complete side note that shouldn't even matter, I kinda put on some weight since I started working lol. At work, she thought she was making a friend in her field for the first time since she started working by talking to William, and when she told her about the stress she was going through, he was a lot more understanding of her situation than I was. I can honestly not blame her for feeling this way. I don't do what she does, and I cannot claim to have done a good job of understanding what she goes through. She made it clear that she initially just wanted to make a friend, regardless of how clueless and naive it may sound. How things degenerated from there, she is aware, was entirely her fault, rooted in selfishness and just looking for self-validation, gratification. I definitely can't accept any excuses for that, and she couldn't come up with a more structured answer for now. She never did anything physical, and she'd like to think that she wouldn't have crossed that line if it got to that point. Whether that is true or not, we unfortunately will never know. For now, I think I believe her enough to just sit on it. After our long discussion, she showed that she was supportive of me focusing more on myself moving forward, where she would have to put in effort to be the glue to hold us together and make things right. For the next few months, we are planning to take some time away from everyone else and just spend time together, talking, going to therapy, figuring things out. I told her that I wanted both of us to be as truthful as we could with each other, regardless of how much it might hurt the other person, because I want to know where the bottom is before attempting to rebuild anything at all. I am fully aware of how trying and painful the next few months or even years are going to be for me, and I honestly don't know if we'll make it past this, but I think she's shown enough for now for me to want to give it a try. I know this is not the satisfying conclusion that a lot of you might be hoping for, and I'll stick around a bit to answer some questions. What do you guys think? Does anything I said make sense? TLDR, GF of 12 years cheated emotionally with a coworker, and I'm going to give this relationship a second chance. Rough, I know. Story 3. I got pregnant from my AP and have no idea how to tell my husband. I've been having what I just recently learned is an emotional affair for 6 months that got physical recently, but just once unplanned and with responsibility was enough for this to happen. I admit I was a coward. The day after it happened, I thought about coming clean to my husband, but I just couldn't get the courage. I don't love him like I used to, but I still care for him and our daughter, and I hoped the love could just reignite like it has done before. So I asked AP for distance and to reset our boundaries, and then just pretend like it never happened. But 2 weeks ago I found out I'm pregnant. I took 3 tests and cried the whole afternoon in disbelief. I have been shut down since. 2 days ago, I told a close friend of mine what happened and asked her to come to an abortion clinic with me. But when we got there, I just couldn't do it. I literally had a mental breakdown and just couldn't even leave her car. What is wrong with me? I've always been pro-choice. I don't want to lose our family, and I know if I have this child I'll only hurt my husband even more and lessen the chance of forgiveness. But I just can't do it. I now want to come clean. I want to take responsibility for what happened and tell my husband everything, and if possible, and if he lets me, help him process everything. All this while juggling the even bigger chance of a divorce if I don't go through with an abortion. So please, if anyone could, lend me some of his perspective, of what can happen and what will go through his mind. I really want to mend this, I just have no idea what to do after coming clean. Update. Yesterday I came clean to my husband about the affair and the pregnancy. It was simultaneously the hardest thing I've ever done and most I've ever hurt someone. I had left our daughter with my parents earlier, so with an empty house he was free to shout. It was the closest I've ever seen him to come into tears, red-faced and pacing around the living room with angry strut, either calling me degrading names and stupid for getting pregnant. And I sat there, deserving it, and answering questions about that night. I told him I'm willing to quit my job if he wishes. I'm willing to move and get us some counseling. He hasn't said anything regarding these topics, so I'm guessing he's also taking his time to think. Afterwards, he just sat on the couch and asked me to leave him alone. He was planning on spending the night there until I told him I was spending the night with my friend to give him space. And after all that, the thing that broke my heart the most was him thanking me for leaving the house and muttering a crooked "I love you" before I left. Today I thought he'd just ignore me and grieve what I've done. I thought he'd take some time to think about things and what he wants to do. But instead, I got my phone bombed with texts with questions. I answered every single one of them, crudely and truthfully, as advised here. But some were just so hard to answer, like the "would you ever tell me if you hadn't gotten knocked up?" The single hardest no I have ever typed. I admit I took a while to send that answer, but did it anyway. Others left me confused as to why he'd want to know the answer. And I truthfully don't want to ask him why he needs to know this, so hopefully someone here can give me some perspective. Why does he need to know if I came? If we did oral? If he was bigger? In what positions? If he was good? I'm certain all of these answers will hurt him even more. I thought the biggest and serious topic that would worry him the most would have been the baby, but instead I can feel that he's dancing around the pregnancy. Now as for me, I'll be spending this week at my friend's. Me and my husband are both emotional wrecks right now, and I just asked my parents if they could take care of our daughter for the week and they agreed. But is there anything besides giving him space and answering his questions that I should do right now? My heart aches knowing he's alone and suffering in our house, so if there's the tiniest thing I can do to help, I'll do it. To finish up this post, I'll just say that tomorrow Monday, I'll ask my AP to meet me after work and tell him about the pregnancy. The hardest is out of the way, but I'm still not looking forward to this one. Edit, I'm asking my husband about his opinion on meeting AP tomorrow. Thank you for your suggestions and insight. It may be harsh, but I'll take it gladly if I can avoid mistakes like meeting AP without telling my husband, even if for a few minutes after work. Update 2. First of all, I want to thank the Reddit users that urged me not to talk with my app after work without my husband's knowledge. I asked him about it and he demanded he'd be there when I tell the app about the baby. I agreed, therefore postponing telling my app about the pregnancy until next weekend, on the condition that my friend and her husband come with us. To prevent any fistfights. He agreed without second thought. Today my husband asked to meet me in person and I agreed. We talked about our life and events that led to that night, as well as the true problems we've been having, and then he asked me to tell him my side of the story face to face now that he's with a clearer head. I'm not going into detail because I'd need several other threads for that, but to cut it short, I begged, cried and asked for forgiveness 1,000 times as I answered every question he had and told him everything. Since I'm super worried about him, I tried to ask him how he's feeling, what he's been thinking and what he has been doing, but in the end he's stone cold and didn't want to tell me much. I respected his space and tried not to pry much longer. I know him and if he doesn't want to talk no one will get it out of him. In the end, he said if it wasn't for the pregnancy he would be willing to forgive me under a certain condition. He says that in a few months they'll be expanding his office and he is willing to pull some strings so I could go work with him. I'll have to start with an apprenticeship to learn how to use a certain program and in the first year the pay will be substantially less. But since there is some experience that carries over from my current job I should get a significant bump in salary after the first year. I immediately said yes. But then came the hard part. He asked me if I had any second thoughts regarding an abortion and I told him the truth. I'm willing to give in to everything except an abortion. No matter how many times I apologized and said I love him, it didn't matter. I could see how hurt he was when I made it clear that is the one stance I'm not backing. He simply said that he loves me, that he wants to make the marriage work but that I'm asking too much. He'll need more time to come to a decision because no matter how much he wants to work things out, he's not sure he can love another man's child like his own. I told him I'm willing to divorce him while we work on reconciliation if it means I'm freeing him from the legal burden of taking care of a child that isn't his. If he is to help me raise this child, I want it out of his own free will rather than the law forcing it on him. Here he simply said that he is going to take it into consideration, but then raised a question that if he were to divorce me, wouldn't that basically force AP into our lives as being a co-parent with legal rights like mine? Since none of us are law experts, we're putting this topic on standby and we'll search for some legal counseling before making a decision. Oh, and I almost forgot about this. Monday we scheduled our first counseling session for next Friday. I'll probably create another thread about how that went. Additionally, seeing as we're both emotional wrecks, we also agreed that our daughter will stay with my parents and with my in-laws for a while, and that I'm the one that's going to inform them of what happened and why we need them to take care of her right now. Finally, I just want to answer some repetitive comments in the last threads and clear some things up. I'm not leaving my husband for my AP. My husband is and will always be my first choice. I worded it really poorly in my first post when I said I don't love him like I used to, because the keywords in that phrase were supposed to be like I used to and never I don't love him. Our marriage had been very passionless in the last couple of months, be it physically or emotionally, since both of us had put other things in front of our marriage. I know I said in the last thread that I wouldn't quit my job if my husband wanted a divorce, but for obvious reasons that has changed. Divorce is a real possibility depending on what we gather from legal counseling, and so is the possibility of us both divorcing and reconciliation. Also, for one, I fully trust my husband to not leave me hanging with the apprenticeship. We have a daughter in elementary school and in his words, he doesn't want the mother of his daughter scraping by, and since the apprenticeship is still months away we have time to judge how things are going. I'm seriously glad I stood my ground against Reddit and didn't rashly quit my job just because Reddit told me to. Not only do I now think my husband would be angry about that, but it'd seriously make everything so much harder. And the last thing I want to address, I beg of you, please stop with the abortion comments and privates. I know how it can hurt my husband. For heaven's sake, it hurts me to think that a baby that is the representation of a violation of my own values is growing inside me. I can't even begin to imagine how my husband feels. I have always been pro-choice. If my husband got someone else pregnant, I'd want her to have an abortion. I can completely relate to everyone telling me to get it, because I'd be urging someone else in my situation to do the same. There hasn't been a single day I haven't been tempted to go to the abortion clinic, to make it go away and ease up everything for everyone. But I simply can't. It feels invasive. It feels wrong. I've had a daughter grow inside me and I can feel the same connection growing with this bunch of cells. It's completely illogical. I know I'm being completely illogical, and all that just makes my own cowardice the more confusing and hurtful. So you can call me a whore, you can call me stupid, selfish, irresponsible, disloyal. I know the moment I cheated I became all of that, and I'm willing to tolerate all of it if it means I'm learning and striving to be the better person my husband deserves. Just please stop throwing around the word abortion as if it isn't haunting me as the obvious choice I know I should make. Update 3. Today we had our first session of marriage counseling, and the main conclusion was that we should have started it sooner. Like way sooner, when the problems really started and we thought everything was okay. It was refreshing to say the least, and listening to a second person's opinion that is not biased to my side or that could listen to the full story only broadened my perspective on what happened. It began with the counselor asking me how the E started. I told him how I have known AP since I started working at my job, but we didn't talk much. Our daily interaction started about 7 months ago when our offices reopened after remodeling during COVID, and we were put on the same team with our desks besides each other. Below is more or less how it started to how it ended, along with some conclusions our talk helped me reach. It started off innocently. Discovering common interests and getting to know each other brought us closer. Naturally, I introduced him to my husband, and from there on out I started inviting him to come along to have some drinks with our group of friends where he fit in pretty nicely. I never had to hide anything from my husband, and he never suspected anything simply because I didn't have anything to hide and I was pretty open about everything. I was that comfortable with my husband and he was that comfortable with me. My husband knew what me and AP talked about through text, since I often showed him pictures and memes and included him in the jokes. I also always told him when and where I was with my AP or any other friend, and he never had a problem with it. I never flirted or did anything remotely sexual with my AP. In truth, we were really good friends that had begun an overly close emotional connection. Selfishly, and while taking my marriage for granted, I started making more time for my new friend and just spending less time with my husband. We shared everything with one another, from details from our childhood to problems in our current lives. I had had some sexual thoughts, of course, but rationalized them as normal, like someone does when they see someone they're attracted to. I was too deep in the affair to see what really was going on. I had fallen for my AP and taken my husband for granted. But at the same time, I didn't really believe I would cheat. I had this ingrained strict idea that cheated was only having sex with someone other than yourself. I had no idea what an emotional affair was, so in my mind, what I was doing wasn't cheating. I was only having fun and enjoying another person's presence. I had assumed my husband would always be there, and I was more interested in spending time with someone else. In the end, neither me or my husband saw my AP as a threat to our marriage. I was too comfortable. I assumed I'd stay with my husband forever and something like me cheating would never happen. However, I never did anything to prevent it from happening, and so I am to blame. At the same time, my husband was doing the same thing, except he wasn't getting his time filled by another person but rather a hobby, side project he had been working on for over a year. Both our libidos dropped and we were just okay not spending time with one another. The scary thing is that we didn't hate one another. We were just okay not going on dates anymore and accepted how each of us decided to use their free time. In both our minds, what I was doing wasn't cheating, and I was more than happy to let my husband do his projects. Afterwards, the counselor compared my affair to the story of the frog and boiling pot, where if you put a frog on a boiling pot it will jump out in fear. But if instead you put it in the pot at room temperature, it will simply sit there and bathe. If then you raise the temperature little by little, the frog will remain there, not noticing anything until the water is too hot and the frog is boiling alive. In this metaphor, he says our marriage isn't dead, though he thinks it is in critical conditions with third-degree burns, and that these wounds and scars will take a lot of time and effort to heal. Now, this is not an excuse. I am still guilty and responsible for having sex with my AP the same way I'd be responsible for killing that frog. If we apply the boiling pot metaphor to that night, though on a much smaller scale, we can see a string of small decisions that led me there. Nothing wrong happened when our group separated and I decided to not go see the game with my husband. Nothing wrong happened when our group arrived at my AP's apartment. Nothing wrong happened while we drank and played board games. And if I look at it from my past perspective, there's nothing wrong with two friends staying late at night to talk about stuff. However, every single action that led to getting comfortable with him became morally dubious, and when he kissed me and I didn't stop him, I became responsible for everything that led to having unprotected sex. After talking about my affair, he shifted focus to my husband and I stayed quiet as I realized what he was doing. He had tried to get my husband's input while we talked about the affair and that night, but my husband doesn't open up easily and would never say directly how he felt about something, especially not to a stranger, even if we're paying for it. He is a stone wall, something I've always thought is unhealthy, and I've always hated that is how he deals with problems. But the moment the counselor started assuming or theorizing things in the form of statements, he just started to agree or deny things, and I cannot begin to describe how my heart crumbled listening to them. He said 3 things that completely broke me. He agreed that he felt stupid because he didn't notice I was falling for my AP and he didn't do anything. He agreed he was selfish and stubborn for spending time on his hobby instead of me. He's been drinking to try and take the images of me having sex with another man off his head. I don't want him to feel like this, I want to help him heal. Sadly, no matter how much the counselor tried, he completely avoided the topic of my pregnancy and our sex life. The most I could gather is that he still doesn't know what to do. He didn't go beyond what I know. He's willing and wants to forgive, but isn't sure he is capable of fathering a baby that isn't his. I absolutely hate myself for the way my husband feels. I hated listening to him say he feels stupid about not noticing and not doing anything. I hated listening to him depreciate his hobbies. I love listening to him talk enthusiastically about them even though I don't particularly enjoy them. In fact, I was planning on making more time to accompany him. I really hope he doesn't change his hobbies. As for the drinking, I know that's how he usually copes with bad news, so I can't say I'm not used to it, but I still hate it when he does it because it means he's seriously suffering. Though, I must admit, hearing that last he's willing and wants to forgive fills me with bittersweet hope. The session was now ending, and by that point I had become too emotional and started to cry right there. Finally, the counselor suggested we each schedule individual counseling next week, each on different days. Now I'm left to ponder. I must admit it felt good to write this out. If you guys have any input on what happened, feel free to tell me. Final update. I didn't even think I would need to write an update about this, but I've received so many messages asking the same that I just had to make this post to save my drowning inbox. Last weekend my husband backtracked on telling App and our parents about my pregnancy. He still hasn't told me why, and when I asked he said he'll let me know when he makes up his mind. So yeah, here's the update people have been asking. Story 4. My story of my wife's infidelity. My wife and I were high school sweethearts who married right after graduation and before my military enlistment. We've now been married over 24 years. Recent revelations have turned my world upside down. Before I start, I want to explain that my wife suffered serious sexual abuse for 2 years as a child and suffers from severe borderline personality disorder, which was only recently diagnosed. Had we known about her mental health issues, we could have avoided what happened because we would have known what red flags to look for. This does not excuse her actions. She is still responsible for her decisions. 4 years after we got married, she had an affair with my best friend from the military. It was hard to accept and took me years to get over it, but I forgave them both. He disappeared for a few years while she and I spent a lot of time talking things out. When he came back, he was married and we had a lot of talks and things returned to normal. He was like my brother and I loved them both. A few years later, my wife confessed that she had bisexuality tendencies but never explored them. It was an interesting conversation, but she never indicated it was anything more than a conversation. A year or so later, she went to a party with some coworkers and after some drinks, started messing around with her female coworker. She said it was awkward and uncomfortable and they didn't get very far. She confessed to me that same week, and while I was not happy, I dismissed it because I wasn't threatened by it. Not long after this, she started hanging out with an old friend from high school that I wasn't comfortable with. Our kids would hang out and watch movies at his place and I went over there a few times when I wasn't working. Then she started hanging out there later, and one day, she came home at 6:30 a.m. and I was furious. She said I was overreacting and that they didn't do anything. She said they were just cuddling on the couch and watching a movie. I lost it, and a few days later, after I had time to calm down, I told her I didn't want her to see him again. She never went back but gave me a hard time about telling her who she could be friends with. 3 years later, we were having a conversation about her failed lesbian experiment when she confessed that she had sex with my best friend's wife a few months earlier. I was upset and asked if my friend knew about it, and she said no. While drinking, again, she said they were messing around and had sex. Again, I wasn't threatened by her messing around with another woman, and she said she was no longer having bisexuality tendencies. I was angry about doing it behind my back, not talking to me about her feelings and then waiting so long to tell me. This was in 2009. From 2009 to 2014, we faced a ton of hardships. 2012 was our worst year. My biggest problem came from a mostly sexless marriage since our second daughter was born. By sexless, I'm referring to 1 to 3 times a month, if anything at all. I was romantic to her, giving her roses, buying her chocolate, making her dinner, taking her out and watching TV together on the couch. We didn't have a lot of money, so we made do. She just never appeared interested. I re-injured my back due to a military-related injury that made it hard for me to be as active as I'd like. I could lash out on days where my pain was the worst and could be miserable to be around. I was never violent, but I did my best to make up for it on the good days. I'm still waiting even today, 14 years later, to get the corrective surgery I need from the VA. On top of that, I was working full-time, was a full-time student, and trying to get my business off the ground. I had a full plate on top of my back injury, but I made it a point of making time for her. She was suffering depression from the birth of our last daughter, and she would shut me out when I tried to talk to her. It started a lot of arguments and fights. She worked part-time and was mostly responsible for caring for the house. Unfortunately, the house was always filthy and any conversation about it always resulted in an argument and her telling me that I needed to help more. So she started hanging out with some of the other soccer moms to vent her frustration, and I let it go because I didn't want her to stay stressed out. I was already working over 60-plus hour weeks, attending school for 33-plus hours a week, and in daily pain. I didn't want her to feel like me and wanted her to just try to enjoy herself and have a good time. From 2014 to Sept 2021, everything was fine. I graduated with my degree, my business was picking up. I was working less hours. We moved out of the city and into a rural community over an hour north. It was still a sexless marriage, but we were enjoying each other's company a lot better. My back still hurts and we occasionally have an argument, but nothing too serious. I was proud of our relationship, we were strong and all was good. We even just bought a house this year. That was up until September 7th. I had always suspected she slept with her friend and she had always denied it and even gave me a hard time about accusing her. It was just a feeling and I never had proof, but I believed it was true. My wife went on a weekend trip with my daughters and I had to stay home to work. While they were gone, I had a serious nightmare about my suspicions and woke up in a sweat. The incident had occurred almost 15 years ago, but I still think of it occasionally, like a feeling of leaving your oven on after leaving your house. It just eats away at you. When she came home, I asked her about it. I was surprised when she finally admitted it, but was more surprised when she admitted to several more affairs, including a man she fell in love with in 2012. I was devastated, crushed. She told me that she never messed around with her friend until after I accused her of sleeping with him. She said that she went to his place and they were drinking and he made a move and she didn't stop him. She said she hated it and it made her feel disgusted. But the next weekend, she went out with him and some of her friends and he started getting possessive of her. Her friends saw it and she was embarrassed. On the way home, she told him she didn't belong to him and that she loved me. She planned to stop hanging out with him. When she got home, this was when I said she couldn't see him anymore, and even though she made that decision on her own, she gave me an attitude about it. The next affair she had was from Jan to Feb 2012. She had sex with my daughter's soccer coach who I knew from the games. He became friends with the soccer moms and they would often hang out. One night, he calls her at work and the conversation turns to sex and they start going into the dirty details of their sexual fantasies. He invites her over after work and even though she knew why he wanted her to come over, she went anyway. They started drinking and had sex. They got together 2 other times after that. In April of 2012, she met a guy at work who started talking to her. They started dating for a few months and were having sex in his car because he currently lives with his parents. They would have sex in random parking lots. I never met this guy, but he met my kids. She fell in love with him and when she found out he was moving to Texas to be with his kids, they discussed her going with him. She realized I would fight her for custody and decided she couldn't go with him. She said after he left, she never had another affair because it was heartbreaking. This was all confessed on D-Day. It was a lot to take in, but she promised there was nothing else. The next day, we continued talking and some thoughts started popping in my head. I was talking to my best friend about what my wife was telling me and he was consoling me. And then I realized that my wife slept with his wife and I didn't know what he knew. I was concerned about ruining his marriage, so I asked my wife about it. I asked if my friend knew about them and she didn't say anything. Warning bells went off in my head, so I asked if he was there. She didn't say anything. My blood started boiling and I asked if it was a threesome and she said yes. She confessed that he called her and said his wife wanted to have a threesome, but she only trusted my wife. Supposedly, my wife asked his wife if it was true and she said yes. They planned it out and met a few weekends later. The threesome started with my wife and my friend rubbing on his wife, but the only 2 people to have intercourse was my wife and my friend. He never had sex with his wife who the threesome was supposed to be for. I exploded. We've been seeing a therapist for a few months. I'm hurting. I feel stupid, ashamed, enraged, disrespected. And I feel pathetic for even considering trying to work it out. She's been faithful for the last 9 years, so she says. But it doesn't change the facts of what happened. And yet I'm stuck between craving her touch and being disgusted by it. If it wasn't for the fact that her BPD was a large contributor to her decision-making, I would have dropped her. But as I learned more about her disorder, I realized the feelings she was having in our relationship was strongly impacted by mental illness. She would see only the negatives in our relationships, but never remembered the positives. It was either all good or all bad. She would be all clingy and loving or hateful and nasty. There was no middle ground there. There is a lot more to the story about D-Day and her confessions, the turmoil and deceptions. But I'll save that for another post. For now, I just need some honest feedback. Thanks.